Hello, listeners. Welcome to the much anticipated first inaugural episode of our brand new podcast, PRI Insights, where we'll discuss some burning economic questions. Today, we have with us our principal economist, Dr. Ashikur Rahman. He has been very active on shaping the economic narrative, so we're delighted to have him here with us today. I hope you are doing well, Dr. Ashik.
Thank you, Labiba. I think it's really nice that PRI has finally started its own podcast. I think this will really help us discuss economic issues, and it will help reach wider audience. Thank you for starting this great initiative.
All right. The very first question that I want to start with is something that most people of our country are concerned about today. Is Bangladesh going to be the next Sri Lanka?
Thank you. I think you started off with a spicy and very scandalous question. And I can understand why people are worried and why people might think that is the case. But my short answer is no. Bangladesh is not going to be Sri Lanka because we are effectively comparing apples and oranges. Sri Lanka faced very different challenges than what Bangladesh is facing now. If you remember, Sri Lanka in 2020 or 2019 only had foreign reserves of $7 billion. And a problem that they encountered was their external debt was around 78% of their GDP, which basically meant that their debt servicing was 8% of their entire GDP. Now, if you compare that to Bangladesh, Bangladesh's external debt is only 16% of GDP, and our debt servicing obligation is around 1% of GDP or less than 1% of GDP and less than 7% of all our exports and remittance or foreign currency income. So if I give you the numbers, our current debt servicing obligation is around $4 billion. Even if it increases to $5 or $6 billion, we have an export income of $55 billion and remittances that reach up to $24 or $23 billion. So our foreign currency earning is around $80 billion just through exports and remittances. So there is no chance for Bangladesh to default on its foreign debt obligation, which happened in Sri Lanka. So I keep saying that the problems we face are totally different than what Sri Lanka faced. Sri Lanka was affected by the terrorist attack and they were affected by COVID-19 restrictions, which meant that their tourism sector was totally wiped out, which is why they could not service their external debt. And these are things that Bangladesh is not dependent upon. So yes, we are not going to be the next Sri Lanka. I hope that that clears the issue because our debts scenario, external debt scenario, is totally different.
Why do you think people are concerned that Bangladesh will become Sri Lanka? I mean, there are some economic problems, but why is there a fear that Bangladesh will go bankrupt just like Sri Lanka?
I think much of it is to do with irrational concerns and hype and some kind of not media, but some kind of economic propaganda by different actors in Bangladesh, outside Bangladesh. But look, nobody is denying that Bangladesh economy is not in pressure. We know that Bangladesh economy is in pressure, but as I said, you're comparing apples and oranges. Our problems come from four different issues. The first issue is we have high inflation, almost close to 10% for last 20 months, which is hurting people, especially with fixed income, which is hurting people who are categorized as poor. Our foreign reserves have been depleting for last 24 months. We lost around 24 billion, which is increasing pressure on the foreign reserves. And our fiscal space is almost nil, which basically means that our development expenditure is totally financed through borrowing from domestic and international sources, which is which is not a sustainable strategy if you factor in the scenario where global interest rates have spiked and local interest rates have spiked. And these three issues are creating a lot of tension within the economy. The fourth issue is, of course, the perilous situation in the banking sector. We know that non-performing loan and rescheduled loan and restructured loan, if you add them up, they account for almost 24% of total deposits. Now that is putting pressure on the banking sector, and that is why central bank had to bail them out through through some kind of loans under promissory notes for 2 consecutive years. So those are different challenges. And if I can go back a bit, if you see, these problems have been accumulating over time. And if you remember 2022, our problems really started in 2022. When the global economy opened up after COVID, there was a pent-up demand, and imports from Bangladesh reached more than $80 billion. And that created a $30 billion deficit in our current account. Now, the standard response to such import explosion is that you devalue your currency and you increase your interest rate. Unfortunately, the central bank in 2022 did not respond accurately to the problem or decisively to the problem. What they did was they only dependent on import restrictions or import compression and a currency devaluation, but they did not push the monetary policy or the interest rate regime out of the 6-9 band that they had. Now, when global interest rates were going from 3% to 5% or 8%, our central bank remained rigid on the interest rate front, which basically meant that our exchange rate took a 30% hit, Taka against dollar, right? We saw a 30% depreciation. Now, this created a problem that the central bank did not foresee. See, the current account deficit created pressures on the exchange rate, which nosedived because we did not support Taka by increasing the interest rate. But this nosedive in exchange rate created pressure on the financial account because a lot of private sector actors borrowed money from international banks, and what they feared was that they borrowed money at 83 Taka, but now they have to pay back at 110 Taka. So their debt obligation skyrocketed due to the exchange rate depreciation, which basically meant that they rushed to pay back the loan, and our financial account went from $16 billion positive in fiscal year 2022 to a $2 billion negative, which basically meant that there was an $18 billion swing. Now you can see that our problem started with the current account and went to the financial account because we did not decisively react with the monetary policy and exchange rate policy that was experienced by other countries. Now, fast forward 20 months, we have lost $20 billion or more in our foreign reserves. But finally, the government has come out of those policies. We saw very recently that the government has unified the exchange rate at 117 and went for a crawling peg exchange rate, which I feel is a very good decision. We also saw over the last 6 months that the government has been increasing the policy rate, and commercial banks were allowed to get out of the 6-9 interest rate band. I think these two monetary policy measures are helping the economy stabilize, and I'm hopeful that the policymakers remain patient over the next 6 months to a year for these policies to have effect on inflation and balance of payment.
But do you think the government is currently taking correct monetary and fiscal policy measures?
As I said, that the fiscal policies will be we are expecting the fiscal policies in the upcoming budget, and I'm hopeful that the contractionary monetary policy will be supported by a contractionary fiscal policy, which will allow the economy to reduce the pressure on the balance of payment, and also inflation. And I give you a layman explanation. See, after 2008, uh, the global economy saw a recession, and therefore advanced economies printed a lot of money to bail these economies out. What it did, and we say quantitative easing, what this quantitative easing did was that it pushed global interest rate close to zero. Now that created a lot of scope for countries like Bangladesh to borrow from the international market, and Bangladesh did borrow from international market. Our foreign debt went from $25 billion to almost $100 billion. And that is why we were able to create the Podda Bridge, the metro rail, the 4-lane highways, the expressway. We could increase our energy production from 4,500 megawatt to 29,000 megawatt. So these infrastructure needed public investment and private investment, and that is what happened. But now the global interest rate regime is no longer close to zero. We know after the Ukraine war that all the global central banks, international central banks, responded to the inflationary climate by increasing the interest rate. So now borrowing is no longer easy. So which means that even Bangladesh needs to make a strategic shift. If the focus was investment between 2010 and 2022, moving forward, the focus should be savings. Because when you have a saving orientation within your economic management, what happens? If you're saving, that means inflation goes down. If you're saving, that means import goes down, and therefore your balance of payment and foreign reserves stabilizes. If you're saving, your debt problem goes down, because now you're no longer borrowing at 12% and investing in local infrastructure projects. So therefore, under the current inflationary climate and the high interest rate climate, the strategic shift that is needed in the upcoming budget is that the focus should be on savings, and those savings come from a contractionary monetary policy and a contractionary fiscal policy. So, and that is where we are hopeful. We have seen all the good early indication that the government is not going to run a big deficit. That deficit financing will be around 4.6%. I hope they don't cross the 4% bar. When they ultimately implement the budget, I think deficit will be around 4% of GDP. And I'm hopeful that if they can commit to the stabilization policy for at least 1 year, Bangladesh economy will get the desired dividend. So I'm hopeful. Let's hope for the best.
What do you think are the long-run prospects for Bangladesh?
Look, this is a difficult question, but I feel that there are 2 or 3 central challenges that Bangladesh is facing. The first central challenge that Bangladesh will be facing is from fourth industrial revolution. See, if you see, our comparative advantage is shaped by our cheap labor, especially in the garments industry and the remittance sector. We are exporting cheap labor, and we are using cheap labor, and we are competing at the world stage by that price differential. Now, if you see what fourth industrial revolution is doing, is that by making the production process workerless, or wiping out human employment from the production process, what it's basically doing is it's reducing the value of cheap labor as a source of comparative advantage. So over next 10 years, I can foresee that Bangladesh needs to figure out a different source of comparative advantage and cannot rely on only cheap labor to become South Korea, right? So fourth industrial revolution will compel us to rethink human capital, to rethink how we skill our young people, to rethink how we educate them and make Bangladesh competitive in the foreign market. Because if we don't do that and keep relying on cheap labor, then this is an iceberg we cannot miss. Because we can see from anecdotal data that fourth industrial revolution, especially robotics, artificial intelligence, is going to displace at least jobs in the manufacturing sector, and therefore it will wipe out the value and relevance of cheap labor. The second problem that Bangladesh will face in the long run is climate change. We know internationally the advanced economies are not doing enough. The Global Climate Fund is a hoax. We don't get any money from that. And basically, the advanced economies who have undertaken pledges and commitment to support countries like Bangladesh who are vulnerable to climate change, they're simply not walking the talk. And therefore, given they're not living up to expectation, we need to find a way through which we can mobilize investment so that we can support a green growth strategy and necessary investments for climate adaptation and mitigation. This is a problem that we need to come up with. Bangladesh has crafted a Delta Plan 2100. It has crafted a Mujib plan for climate prosperity. Mujib, I think that's what it's called. We have some national level strategies, and I'm hopeful we can, do what is necessary, even if advanced economies are not coming forward. The third, I think, the big challenges that is coming our way is the increased polarization between US and China. You can see that the global political order is polarizing, and countries are camping in the different sections. And I think advanced economies will keep mounting pressure on countries like Bangladesh, which wants to stay neutral in this competition for global political hegemony between especially China and US. And I feel I support a neutral strategy because we have a sovereign country and we have the right to shape our own foreign policy, and we have the right to craft our own foreign policy. So if global political powers are polarizing the space and starts bullying countries like Bangladesh, then that will make our journey in the near future very difficult. But these are challenges that we have to navigate, and I'm hopeful that we'll do what is needed in the near future.
How hopeful are you about Bangladesh?
I think I'm overall a positive person. I feel that when our country gained independence, a lot of pundits categorized Bangladesh as a basket case, a land with no hope. But we have seen over the years, over the last 5 decades, that the country has come a long way. And I'm hopeful because our people are resilient, our people are hardworking, our young people are creative, our young people are willing to learn and compete at the global stage. So with the right leadership and right kind of institutions and political ideology, I think Bangladesh can go a long way. I'm very hopeful. We have seen a lot of change over the last 15 years. We have seen Bangladesh, go from a country with $600 per capita income to $2,700 per capita income. We have pushed down extreme poverty to 5%. We have brought down poverty to under 18%. I think these are amazing achievements, and I hope that we can do what is necessary to keep this journey forward. And I will remain hopeful. Thank you.
Absolutely. We hope for the best for Bangladesh. Thank you, Dr. Rashik, for joining us today. Thank you to everyone who tuned in for the very first episode of our podcast, PRI Insights. On our next episode, we will have Dr. Ahsan H. Mansoor with us to discuss his reflections on the upcoming national budget. Stay tuned for the next episode.